Hi, I'm Mike London, and I'm the director of the Ohio Playwrights Circle, a service organization for playwrights. Over the years, I've read lots of good books on playwriting. There are some wonderful educators that have been guiding writers across the theater communities. This series of interviews is a chance for each of us to get to know some of those educators and their approach to storytelling. Today, I want you to meet Stuart Spenser, the author of the Playwrights Guidebook. I've used his book in many classes over the years. If you don't have a copy, get one. It's a great resource. I hope you enjoy.
I had begun teaching in this institute of connected to ensemble studio theater, and that went on for quite some time, but it evolved into a private workshop. I just kind of cut ties and went off and did it on my own. And I was finding that I thought, gosh, there must be a book out there that I can refer to and I can refer them to, maybe read it, learn something myself, who knows. And I did read a lot of them, and they really, for me, they just came up short. There are those that people swear by, and that's great. And I'm glad they like them, but for me, it didn't work. I wasn't really thinking about writing a book. I was just thinking about writing something that I could hand out to my students back in the days of photocopy machines and so forth. I could a new person in the workshop would come in, and I could just give it to them and say, okay, I just want you to know, here's the vocabulary I'm using. Here are the concepts that I'm going to be talking about, just so you know, not that they're right or wrong, just it's how I do things, and this is how it goes. And so I did, and I wrote what was a kind of a very minimal version of part one, not nearly as in depth, but covering action, conflict, and event, which were things that I already was very clear. I knew that I just knew that those were essential, and I think there were maybe a couple other things too. So there were like 3 or 4 chapters of this handout, and I did hand it out to my workshop. I handed it out to everybody, mostly to say, is this going to be useful? If you were new in the workshop, would this be of use to you? And does it make sense? And I got feedback, and they said, oh, well, this doesn't really make sense, and you should do more with this, and that you don't need, that kind of thing. And one of my I don't call them students because they were adult playwrights. There was my workshoppers happened to be a former editor at Viking. And he said to me, why don't you publish this? It's perfect, it's better than anything that I know about. And I said, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll think about that. But I kept working on it for class because I wanted to kind of, much of the book was written, at least parts 1 and 2 at least, were written piecemeal. They were written as I went along and got feedback from people, and then reworked them and then handed them out again and so forth. And so I kept doing that. And eventually I did come up with something that was, I thought, publishable. And it took a long time for it to get published. The classic story of, I had an agent, he shopped that book for at least 2 years, came close with a couple publishers, nothing was happening. And finally he said, look, I've sent it to everybody there is. I can't do anymore. I said, well, thank you very much. I had never set out to publish a book anyway, so it didn't hurt all that much. Although I did, my pride was a little wounded, but whatever. And then about 2 years after that, I was in a festival of plays at Ensemble Studio Theater, and we had a publisher FS&G had acquired the label of Faber and Faber, and so they were looking for things to publish, and they were going to publish the plays in this festival. And the editor came in after the show one night just to talk to all the playwrights and say, this is the deal, and this is what the contract is going to be, and so forth. And said, we're doing this because we have Faber and Faber, and we're trying to build up the list. And I said to her, well, are you interested in playwriting textbooks also? And she said, if it's a good one, sure. And I said, well, here you go. And she called me up and said, this is great. We'd love to publish it. You have a lot of work to do on it, frankly. But given that you do the work that we want you to do, we'd be happy to publish it. So it's it's one of those things where you beat your head against a brick wall, and then you stop and you just don't do anything. And in walks the person who says, sure, of course I'll publish it. Classic case of that. But the book was really very, I think one of the reasons it works is because it was truly written organically. It was written not to be a book, but to be something to help these particular students of mine, or these workshoppers of mine, be in my workshop. That was all it was intended to be. But I think it works because that is exactly the position that so many playwriting teachers find themselves in. Here are these people that don't really know anything about what's going on. How do I begin to tell them, start at zero? I think another thing I'm good at, to just go back to an earlier question, as being a teacher, but it's something I've always been good at, is I understand how to address somebody and assume they know nothing. And once I figure out, oh, they do know that, great, okay, well, we can move on. But until I know that they know that basic thing, I'm not going to let go. We got to understand there's certain basic things. If you're going to work with me, if you're going to work with somebody else, it's a different story. But if you're going to work with me, you have to understand this, because it's the only way I know how to do it. And you're not going to get anything out of me if you don't understand my vocabulary and my concepts. The book was only parts 1 and 2 when I handed it in to her. And she said, you have to take the next step of tell them what they do after they have a first draft, which is a lot harder to do in a book, because, as I said to her, but every play is different. I mean, how do you revise a play? Well, you got to give me the play, and then I can tell you. Dramatic story is about a moment in time, as opposed to a narrative story, which can be, again, anything can be anything, but generally speaking, novels and stories and so forth, when you say, tell me the story, you get the whole story. That's the way prose works. But plays are either literally about a moment in time, plays that happen in literally one time and place, or at least one day. And even if they're not that, they're still highly, highly selective. A play selects, is much more selective than a narrative work is. You got to pick and choose. You've only got, roughly 2 hours, more or less, and can only do so much. And so the theory of the 40% is that you have to skip things that are, in another kind of logic, are essential and that you have to know about, but you have to skip them because they're not really where the drama lies. And greatest play we have, well, Oedipus the King. My gosh, there is so much backstory in that in that play, going back scores of years, right? I mean, it goes way, way back, the story of it does. But it begins on this morning when Oedipus has already sent Creon to the oracle, right? It's another little sleight of hand that Sophocles masters at the beginning of that play. Is Oedipus first comes out and says, oh, what's all the problem, people? And they say, well, there's a terrible plague in our city, and we don't know what to do about it. And Oedipus says, oh, well, thankfully, I've just sent Creon to the oracle to find out why. And I think, well, why did you come out and say that what the problem is? You clearly know what the problem is. But that's a classic case of just cutting way into the story, and even the day that could have been spent. We could have had a scene where Oedipus says, "Listen, Creon, we got a plague here. I want you to go see the oracle." Scene 2, the following day, Creon comes back from the oracle. Right? You could do it that way, but Sophocles very wisely didn't, And because he's observing the 40%, he's going as far into the story as possible. And almost all plays on some level do that. They say, oh, people always use Shakespeare as an example of, oh, that's, Shakespeare does everything. He does, he's got 25 scenes and you go all over the place and so forth. Yes, he does. But there are two things about that. First of all, within each scene, he has chosen the last possible moment. So that if he's got a play of 25 scenes, every one of them begins at just exactly the right moment where the drama is going to happen. And secondly, even though it takes place over a long period of time, he still is beginning the story at a moment that is much later than you would expect. How does Macbeth begin? It doesn't begin with scenes of Macbeth as a nice guy and hearty and well met and so forth. It begins at the moment just when he's about to meet those witches for the first time. That's when the play begins, because the rest of it is just the story of Macbeth as a normal human being. But this is the story of him under extraordinary circumstances. So he's always cutting in to a very late point. And it's, Horace, the Roman poet, coined the phrase in medias res, which literally means in the middle of things, which is another way of saying it, right? I mean, 40% in medias res, we're all saying the same things. But like that phrase, in the middle of things, well, what things and where's the middle, right? It's very subjective. And that's what I try to convey to my students, is that it's not about some objective truth about where the objective right moment to start is. It's your right moment. It's your subjective moment, but it should be as far as possible. That's all. Well, I've already mentioned two of them, honestly. The one is the playable action, and the other is the spontaneous impulse writing, and really doing it enough that I tell my students, they do a lot of those in my class, because one or two is not enough. You have to do a lot of them. I say it's like going to the gym and you're exercising a muscle, and the muscle is the muscle of letting go, the muscle of being spontaneous, the muscle of following your impulse wherever it leads you. And you have to build that muscle, and you have to get used to it. And you have to trust it. And you have to, really internalize it, so that when you come to writing your own play, you are willing to step off the cliff and see what happens, and not know where you're going. So those two things. The third thing I would say is to be open always to the fact that your play is not going to turn out to be what you planned. And that's a good thing. In fact, I dare say it's almost always the best thing about any play is the thing that goes awry, the thing that surprises you, the thing that wasn't supposed to happen, the thing that totally screws up all of your beautiful plans that you had for making your play. That's the gold. I'll give you an example. The play is a fascinating play that happens between an ordinary person, a woman, and God. Except God, in this instance, has taken human form, although in every scene, it's a different human, but it's the same God, which is really interesting, right? Is because you think, well, what would God appear as? Well, it doesn't matter. It could be anything. And the action of the play is basically that the human wants God to do more to fix the world, to make people, and fix the world by which she means to make people behave better, to be more kind and more generous and more accepting, and all that stuff. And but did I mention they're married? They're a married couple. God and this woman have gotten married. And so the woman is saying, you have to do more. And God is saying, hey, I'm doing the best I can, go out every day, fighting the fight. And I come back here, I just want a hot dinner. And all I get from you is, I've got to do more. So it's really terrific. It's a fascinating piece. But what happened in the writing of the play is that, and again, this was something that she didn't anticipate was going to be in the play, but there it appeared, was they had a next door neighbor in their apartment building who is an old guy, and he's really, shall we say, not woke. He is way sound asleep, and this woman really doesn't like him. But she's decided that since God is not able to do what she wants, she's going to take it upon herself, not to change all of humanity, but at least to change one human being. So she keeps going over to the guy's apartment, trying to make nice with him, bringing him casseroles and, and whatever. And nothing seems to be working. He's still the crotchety old bastard that he ever was. And then the play ends with that not being resolved. And I said to her, you don't want to put this guy on stage. You don't want to put Mr. Peterson, the next door neighbor, on stage. And she said, oh, no, that was not the plan. That was never the plan. This is a play about the woman and God. And I said, yeah, but the one playable action in this play, you're leaving off stage. The one time when we actually get to see her do this thing that is the most important thing to her, which is try to change humanity, or at least a human, it's all off stage. And all we ever see is to hear about it. We never see it. And it's a classic case of you discover something in your play, and unfortunately, it changes what your play is. It's not according to the plan, but in my opinion, makes the play so much richer and more specific, and just everything to me would come alive. And the problem is that it wasn't part of the plan. And if it's not part of the plan, she doesn't want to do it, because that's not the play I talk about the play you want to write and so forth. She said, that's not the play I want to write. I'm like, no, but it is the play that you are in fact writing. That's the difference. Don't fight it, embrace it, because Mr. Peterson and that relationship came out of, it happened when you weren't paying attention. You thought this play was about this woman and God. And when you weren't paying attention, Mr. Peterson hijacked it. He just did. I'm sorry he did, but he did. You can't do anything about that. And I'm happy to say that we had a talk a week or two ago, and I did convince her that she should do it, if nothing else, as an experiment, if nothing else as that's a really important experience in this woman's life, and you, the playwright, should know not just that it happened, but exactly what happened, like exactly what went down between her and Mr. Peterson on these several interactions that she has with him. I said, if nothing else, it's going to inform you about that, and that in itself would be a good thing. So whether you include it in the play ultimately is up to you. It's your play. It's not my play. You don't have to make me happy. You got to make you happy. But you should know everything you have to know. And so she's going to do that. And she's a lovely person and very open in general. But it's that, and I understand that terrified moment of, wait, that's not what I had in mind at all. What am I going to do about that? And, essential thing to remember is embrace it. Just embrace it. Now, it may turn out to be a dead end. She may write those scenes and they just may come to nothing, and maybe she was right after all. Absolutely possible. I'm not saying, I don't know, but you have to find out. You have to find out what it is that your subconscious was busy doing while you were busy paying attention to your play. What was the other part of your mind busy doing? Is always interesting. It may not be right. It may not be, you may not keep it, but it's definitely something to pay attention to and to embrace. Oh yeah, I would. And in fact, I tried. I contacted FS&G. My editor is long gone.
Yeah.
But I contacted, whoever is my contact there. And I said, I'd really love to do an update of the book. I now look at it and I go, ooh, did I say that? I don't think I would say it that way. Or, oh my gosh, I'm so missing, there seems to be something missing here that I now know that I didn't know then. And he very politely gave me the kiss off, basically. They had no interest in it. It's expensive. for them to do that. You know, to do a reprint is nothing. That doesn't cost anything. But to do a new edition with actual new texts and things, that's expensive. And their point of view is the book's doing just fine, just the way it is. And as far as we're concerned, there are no problems. And the fact that the author thought that there were problems did not seem to influence them very much. So yes, there are things that I would just out and out change, but mostly make more of this, or emphasize, you know, put some emphasis here, and you know, whatever. It just would be a better book, I think. But there are no signs of that happening anytime soon, unfortunately. I always tell my students, don't put in act breaks in your first draft, or maybe even in your second draft, maybe. An act break has no dramaturgical value. It means nothing. It's a time when people get up and go to the bathroom. It has nothing to do with the dramaturgy of the piece. Scenes are dramatic units. An act is just an arbitrary time when you say, well, we've had enough of that for now. We're all going to get up and stretch. So I say, don't put them in, and wait until you get to a point where you think, that's where it goes. That's where it has to go. Or you may discover it doesn't have one. And lots of plays don't these days. Lots of plays don't have an act break. But if they do, it should come about organically. It should evolve. It should tell you, this is where I need to break, rather than this is where you have to break. And that is partly time. It is partly we have to get up and stretch. Although another factor can be emotional. I have a wonderful student who's written a wonderful play, quite short. It's about 90 minutes, but she really wants to put an act break in. And indeed, there's a scene in the middle of the play where a man strangles his daughter to death. And I said, you know, this play doesn't really need an act break in terms of time, but you might want to give the audience a few minutes to process that. So I think maybe that's a good idea in your case. You know, sometimes things happen that the audience just needs time. You know, they got to think about this for a minute. So it's both of those things together that I think determine an act break. The page equals a minute of stage time, which if it's in standard format, it should be about that, although things do vary.
Yeah.
So assuming we're saying 60 minutes to 80 minutes, yeah, I mean, there are, I've seen 80-minute plays on Broadway, quite honestly. 90 is kind of the more typical, you know, length. So I would think 60 minutes, you know, a play is producible if you can get a producer to produce it. So, you know, who knows, but 60 seems short. I think you might have a hard time with that. 80 possible, 90 done all the time. All the time. And great plays, Tally's Folly, Night Mother, you know, lots and lots of 90-minute one acts out there. The original one act version of A View from the Bridge is about 90 minutes and is better than the 2-act version, I think. So the big pitfall is that you will have a very hard time getting it produced. Yeah. In a you know, professional production. On the other hand, if you're writing for colleges, schools, and community theaters, it's often a very good thing to have a big cast. So it depends on what you think your audience is going to be. The other thing is, every time you add a character, you are adding a degree of difficulty. And you have to be able to manage all of them. You know, there's no such thing as, oh, I'll just put them on stage and hope for the best. Everything has to be full. You know, ever since Chekhov, you got to fill every character. You got to give every character their moment. Maybe before Chekhov, not so much. You know, you had lots of extras, lots of supernumeraries and so forth. But since Chekhov, even the butler, even the old Fears, you know, the guy who dies at the end of Cherry Orchard, he gets a couple of really great scenes. Passionate about, something you really care about, something that matters to you. And I think that's important because that's the play that you're willing to really work on and revise and rewrite and keep going back to, because you're still passionate about it. Doesn't necessarily make a better play, but it makes a play that is, you will give it your best shot because you care about it. Well, I mean, I'm biased. I like a beautifully structured play. I like a play that, lands somewhere, hopefully surprising, sometimes inevitable. Best of all, surprising but inevitable. Not everybody cares about that. I'm not sure everybody else thinks that's important. I mean, from the plays that I see produced generally these days, apparently they don't. But I certainly do. And ultimately, at the end of the day, characters. That's really what audiences connect with. The audiences don't care about dramaturgy. They don't care about structure. Well, they do, but they're not aware of it. Even if they do care about it, they don't know what dramatic structure is. They don't care about it, nor should they. But they do care about people, and they love to see interesting, complicated people. And I think if you can have vibrant, vivid, really specific characters in your play, whether likable or not, because likability has become this hobby horse of people, that I have to like the characters. And I think, God forbid, no, I don't. I personally don't have to like them at all, but they have to be complicated and interesting for sure. So those are my three things off the top of my head. There are probably about 20 more. I mean, you have to know your stuff. I mean, you gotta be able to know what structure is and how to tell a dramatic story. I think, again, other people might disagree that you don't have to do those things, but I do. And but I feel like that's kind of a given. You have to know what you're doing, I guess, is important. But beyond that, it really is curiosity and empathy, curiosity about this play and where it comes from and what that playwright is trying to do with it. I think it's all about that for me, and again, for me, it's the enjoyable part. I love talking about that stuff. The only hard part is reading. Everything else is great fun. Oh, you can go to stuartspenser.com.
Okay.
And anything that I'm remotely willing to show the world, some of them with some trepidation, but nevertheless willing, are there. And the only one that's not there for free is Resident Alien, which is published and which you can get on Amazon for a fairly nominal fee.
Okay.
But it has to be Stuart S. Spenser, because Stuart Spenser is the name of some big financial firm somewhere, and they'd already taken that name.